What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Other Guys on the Badlands Podcast Network. I'm Jake Chatsky, joined alongside my co-host, my partner in crime, Paul Kilgallen. Paul, how you doing today?
Man, I'm still in mourning over the Yukon Huskies.
Yeah, sorry.
It was look, I came into this tournament being like they're either going to get bounced in the first round or they're going to make a deep run because that's how the team's been this year. And I think, once they got past Oklahoma, I was like, all right, like I think they're dangerous. And they proved that they were against Florida. I think I would have had an easier time digesting the loss if they just like trailed by 8 the whole time. But the fact that they were ahead pretty much the entire game and then blew it a little late, it kind of it intensified the pain a little bit. So I'm still struggling a little bit, but I'm happy to be talking Jets and happy to be kind of moving on to the next thing now.
Can't win them all. You got some back-to-back championship runs. I can't say I feel too bad for you. But, I was rooting for UConn slightly. I think I had who was it, Florida going far in another bracket, so maybe not. But it was nice. Dan Hurley was caught up in his feelings a little bit, but sorry for all you UConn Huskies not getting a three-peat. I mourn for you guys.
Embarrassment of riches.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll be talking about the Jets like that one day. But we're gonna do something. It's kind of a dead period in the off season. And we're turning the page from free agency to draft. So we're going to do something a little bit different this episode. We're calling it mock outrage. Kind of a little play on words because we're going to be reacting to and getting very mad at mock drafts with the caveat that like no one should actually be getting mad at mock drafts. They're a fun exercise and, gives us something to discuss during this dead period. But I don't think anyone's ever been 100% accurate with a mock draft. So please don't take any of this criticism too seriously, but it felt like a fun thing for us to do at this point in the off season. But before we get into that, I have to ask you a kind of a controversial question. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts. It's a fill in the blank question. Garrett Wilson will be a top blank receiver in the NFL this year.
Higher than 45. I'll say that. I mean, good God, what an insane tweet. And I said it in the Badlands group chat earlier today, and like I can't imagine. Let me try to change what I actually said in the group chat to be a little bit more PG-13 here. But I can't imagine standing by your boy so hard that you could just ignore tape, ignore stats, ignore data, ignore general popular opinion. Like I'm just going to ignore all of it. And I'm just going to make this ridiculous take because Rodgers is my boy. Like, I don't know, man. I have a hard time with that. If you're asking me to assign a number, I think Garrett Wilson, considering what the quarterback play might look like for the Jets this year, I think you could easily make a case that he's a top 25 receiver. And like, that should not be a controversial thing for me to say. Like, I'm trying to be a little bit generous and not be a homer here. But like, is he a clear number one receiver in the NFL in hopefully the top half? Yeah, absolutely. That should happen easily. So I don't know, man. How deep do you want to go on this Kurt Benkert tweet?
Yeah, if you've been living under a rock, Kurt Benkert, had said that Garrett Wilson would be a top 45 receiver in the NFL. Jets fans reacted accordingly to that ridiculous statement. He also put out a list of 32 wide receivers. He then couched it by saying they weren't in any order, but he also said that everyone on the list was above Garrett. First off, just to level set, there have been 5 players in NFL history who have had 80 catches and 1,000 yards in each of their first 3 seasons. It's Odell Beckham, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Michael Thomas, who was out of his world for the first few years of his career, and Garrett Wilson. And Benkert had some guys on his list. I'll tee this up, but like first off, he said the Chiefs and the Bills wouldn't trade Xavier Worthy or Khalil Shakir straight up for Garrett, which is an insane take. He also had Josh Downs on the list, which I think a lot of Jets fans had a lot of fun with. Who was the most infuriating player you saw on his list that he had over Garrett?
I mean, it's almost easier to say like who are the ones I'm okay with. There's a lot on here that bothered me just from the standpoint of sample size. Like McConkey, yeah, he had a good season. Brian Thomas Jr. had a great season. Like, are you going to sit here and say they're better than a guy who's put up 3,000-yard seasons with absolutely nobody throwing him the ball? I think probably the one, and I'll stay away from Josh Downs because that's like the hottest button one. So if I'm trying to be a little bit different here, I would say that probably Jerry Jeudy bothers me the most because that guy has been in the NFL for 6 years now at this point, and he was very, very highly touted coming out of Alabama, and he was mostly disappointing in Denver. And then like he popped a couple times with the Browns last year, but like he's okay, right? And so to sit here and say like what's the criteria you're using at this point? It's obviously not statistics. It can't be eye test. And so Jerry Jeudy really bothers me. And then, like I said, there's a bunch that just bother me from the standpoint of sample size. Downs is probably the worst one. I mean, Josh Downs has barely played. He's been in the NFL for 2 years. He's barely played. He's missed half his games with injury. Khalil Shakir bothers me a lot, but I'm trying to figure out in my brain if it bothers me because it's Buffalo or if it's a true, like, I mean, listen, Garrett Wilson's better than Khalil Shakir. It's not up for debate. I'm just wondering if it bothers me so much because he's a Buffalo guy. And because, by the way, he was on the Bills for 4 years before he had that year last year and earned this big contract, right? So, like, where was he that whole time? So, yeah, there's a lot on this list that I have problems with. What about you?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with some of these sample size ones. Like to see Rome Odunze and Marvin Harrison Jr., who
Both
Harrison
disappointing
Jr.
rookie years.
Disappointing rookie years, both drafted around the same class, both ostensibly dealing with better quarterback prospects than the Jets surrounded Garrett Wilson with for his first 3 years. Rodgers, taking Rodgers aside, knowing how much of a fanboy Kurt is of him, like Marvin Harrison Jr. was, playing in an offense with Kyler Murray, and you're comparing that to like an offense with Zach Wilson or Tim. I'm even blanking on his name. Fucking
Tim Boyle.
Thank you. God damn it. Now I almost want to leave this in just to show how unmemorable the quarterback play has been around Garrett Wilson, who continues to put up 1,000-yard seasons after 1,000-yard seasons. It's unbelievable to have this take. And it got me, rightfully so, very worked up, but not enough time that we should devote too much longer to this. I just wanted to, state for the record, knowing that all Jets fans had this opinion, that this is one of the most asinine takes we've seen all offseason.
Yeah, so the worst part about this for me, I think, is that he made the tweet, and then obviously everybody came after him, as Jets fans do on Twitter, and a lot of people said like name him, right? Like if you're saying 44 or better, like go. And he didn't put out 44. He put out a bunch, and then he tried to like backtrack a little bit, and he goes that there's a ton of guys that are solid. Wilson's in there, but the hype is more than the product. And then this sentence is the worst part for me. If he can piece it together to find consistency, he's top 20. It's his first 3 years in the league, 80 catches, 1,000 yards. Like that is what consistency is. So like, what are you talking about? And then he says, if not, he's in the 40s or 30s. And so I think it's just like, it's a guy firing off for his buddy that didn't really think things through. And he effed around and found out with Jets fans on Twitter. So
yeah, love Jets fans calling him on it for sure.
Yep.
Keep that up. Keep holding people to the fire. Keep holding journalists accountable. We love to see it. Speaking of holding some journalists accountable, let's get into some mock outrage. So it's mock season. We've got a couple that we want to go through, but I want to start and shout out to the guys over at Draft Season, Meigs and Dan in their latest episode. They were talking about this mock, which sort of inspired me to go through some of the other ones. But I want to start with Daniel Jeremiah's latest mock. Leading up to the Jets pick, he has Cam Ward going 1, Abdul Carter going 2, Shedeur Sanders going 3, Travis Hunter going 4, Jalen Walker going 5, Ashton Genty going 6. And so on the board for the Jets are the 3 most talked about names for the entire draft cycle. We've got Mason Graham, we've got Tyler Warren, and we've got Armand Membo. I'm always gonna fuck up pronouncing that name, but he went with Membo. What are your thoughts on that player, but also if all three of those guys are available, is this the direction you see the Jets going?
So I would say it's no secret the Jets have a pass catcher need, an offensive line need, and a defensive line need. And those are all things that you could pick with a premium pick. Linebacker and safety are not things you're picking at 7, right? And so you put those a little further down on the need list. And if those three players are available, I would say that offensive line is the one that has the most flexibility, right? In terms of, can you do something creative like maybe somebody else did in a mock that we're going to talk about a little later, to find some value in that later on down the board. That being said, I am never going to get upset with picking an offensive line piece at a premium spot at number 7, right? So do I think it's the most flexible of the three needs? And if you have those three guys on the board, it's probably not the one that I would prioritize the most. But am I going to get mad about it? No. What I would get mad about is if these three players were on the board and the Jets didn't pick any of them and went in some random direction, like picking an edge player or something like that, right? Like that's where I get mad. So if I'm the trigger man, I don't know if I'm picking Membu there, but I'm not going to I won't overreact on draft night if that's the case, because you just got the other side of your offensive line locked up for a long period of time also. And when you factor in what we have at the rest of the pieces there, now you're looking like a good unit. So not what I would do, but I'm good with it.
Yeah, I think from a timeline perspective, like if you have Membu and Olu locking down bookends at your tackle spots, that could be the foundation of an offensive line for the next 10 years. I do think and we'll get to this a little bit. I do think the Jets might have some flexibility there, but I will also caveat that with, I think on a player for player standpoint, like I think I would probably prefer to go with Graham here. But that being said, if they think they could get a interior defensive lineman a round or two later, like I see the vision where you're not necessarily going to luck into a premium tackle in the second or third round. So I understand why DJ made this the pick here with all three available. I don't necessarily know that that's the direction I think the Jets will go on draft night, but it's an interesting thought exercise because I think in a lot of recent drafts and even in this one, we've sort of been projecting that our hand will be forced in one way or another, where one of those three guys will come off earlier. And in a situation where they don't, as long as they're picking from that pool of three, I'll come away happy on night one of the NFL draft.
Exactly. Just don't throw us a wild card. That's all.
Yeah. So speaking of, his counterpart, Mel Kiper, had Mason Graham going 5th to the Jaguars. So he was already off the board. But in a decision between Membu and Tyler Warren, Mel Kiper went with Tyler Warren. Other notable from, we've talked a lot about Tyler Warren on this pod. I don't necessarily think we need to go into this pick. And I think it's a pretty standard one from a Jets standpoint. The one thing that I think is interesting about Mel Kiper's mock draft, he had Jackson Dart going at 9 to the Saints. Do you see a world where, I know Mason Graham was off the board here, but do you see a world where some other notable guys, Membu in this draft went at 11, Will Campbell went at 13 to Miami? Do you think there's a world where the Jets have the opportunity to trade back with a team looking for a Jackson Dart, looking to come up for a quarterback in round 2? Or do you think that market has basically, besides Sanders and Ward, no one's trading up for any quarterback in this class, and that's just a pipe dream clickbait engagement thing that Mel Kiper is trying to get us to do here, putting Jackson Dart at 9?
I'll tell you what I think. I think the Jets think somebody might want to trade up, because why else on earth would there be reports supposedly leaking out of a front office that's not talking to anyone? They're not talking to media, right? But somehow we're getting leaks that, hey, don't rule it out. Jets might take a quarterback at 7, right? And so when you follow the breadcrumbs like that, I would think that, again, like I said, I think the Jets think somebody wants to trade up, or at the very least, they're trying to bait somebody into calling to see if they want to trade up. I think that it's possible that Dart goes high, and it's nothing about Jackson Dart. It's just about the NFL and how quarterback crazy it gets around the draft. And so if like the top two guys, if Ward and Sanders go in the top three, right? And maybe there's a team between 4 and 7 that wanted one of those two guys. Maybe they start thinking about sliding down. Like maybe I can get Dart in the teens, right? And so that's when all the movement can start to happen. And if somebody like that slides down, then that could cause somebody else to want to jump up and say, oh, the Giants slid down into the teens. Well, I'm going to come up to 9, right? Or whatever the case may be, whoever the team is. I don't think I see the Saints picking Dart at 9. I think the Saints are probably looking at Nussmeier next year, right? So I don't know if I agree with Kiper's mock here. I hate to agree with Mel Kiper about anything. Guy's been doing it too long, and I feel like he's a little out of touch at this point. But I'm okay with the Tyler Warren pick with Membu on the board. Kind of like if we go back to that first Daniel Jeremiah one, like I'm kind of okay in any of those three directions. Like I'm not getting mad about any of those, right? So any mock that ends up with one of those three going to the Jets, I'm going to be, find a way to talk myself into it. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with Dart. I think a lot of it is smoke and mirrors, but will it work on someone is the question, right? Like who's going to take the bait and try to jump up?
One other player I want to ask you about before we get to our next two mocks, because both of these mocks had Membu, who the Jets took, going before Will Campbell. And obviously, Kiper went with Tyler Warren here. He had Membu at 11 to San Francisco. He had Will Campbell at 13 to Miami. Obviously, there was the whole arm length concern going into the combine. But just in your mind, Paul, like, do you feel like, especially, and we'll get into this a little bit, with the versatility of the Jets offensive line, would you, if Campbell starts to fall past New England, which seems to be his like pivot point in this draft, how do you feel about going him versus Membu? Or do you think Membu is just a far more cleaner tackle prospect versus taking someone who might end up being a guard top 7?
It's hard for me to be objective about it because of Mekhi Becton. I'll be honest. Like the fly up the board after the combine guy